Necessity is the mother of invention, as the old saying goes. Well, this video is very necessary because I'm talking about the mother of all inventions. Machines and devices that change the world forever. I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 forgotten inventions that revolutionized our lives. But before I begin, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe. Oh, and hit that notification bell. Thanks a lot. Okay, on with the list. 25. The slide rule. You can do calculations without a calculator? Yeah, I know. I'm talking about an invention that predates calculators called the slide rule, or slipstick. It's a little complicated to explain in a short video, but what I can tell you is that the slide rule is like a giant ruler with moving parts, which uses the principle of logarithmic scales. What do I mean by that? Well, instead of punching buttons on a calculator, you're manipulating the slide rule like a puzzle to work out the answer. So if you were doing multiplication, you wouldn't multiply one number by the other, you'd work it out with the sliding parts, which tell you everything you need to know. Clear? Sure, why not? The first slide rule was created in approximately 1622 by Anglican minister William Oughtred, and it became the math tool of choice for the pros right up until the 70s. The 1970s, that is. 24. Phonautograph. You've probably heard of a phonograph, which was a forerunner of the gramophone and record player. But what about a phonautograph? This was the first ever invention that recorded sound, created by French inventor Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville in 1857. You can see from the way it looks that the phonautograph isn't exactly a gramophone, but there are similarities. If you're wondering how the sound was played back, the answer is, it wasn't. The idea was to translate the sound waves into a readable format by etching them on paper or glass. Why would you want to read them? So you could study the acoustics. Sound isn't always about what you hear. 23. The mangle. The mangle sounds like a disturbing invention, and it kinda was. You used it to dry your clothes by half crushing them between two rollers. A crank handle turned those rollers, and the mangle handled the heavy work for you. This was 19th century ingenuity at its finest, though fabric wasn't the only thing that got caught in the rollers. You wanted the clothes to be mangled, not your fingers. Doing the laundry had never been more dangerous. 22. Magic lantern. Without magic lanterns, we wouldn't have cinema. Allow me to explain. They look pretty basic to us today, but back in the 17th century, they were majorly enchanting. Magic lanterns worked by projecting light from a source, like an oil lamp, through a glass artwork. The lantern had a lens and concave mirror, which it used to concentrate and blow up the image from the glass. Once film became part of world culture, the idea of the magic lantern got an upgrade, forming the basis of projection technology for cinema. 21. Vacuum tube. Sometimes the greatest developments in technology rely on just one component. The vacuum tube is a key example of this. The tubes basically used low pressure, or a vacuum, to control the flow of electrons. This discovery, made by the so-called father of electronics, Sir John Ambrose Fleming, allowed easier amplification and switching in early devices. This move paved the way for radios, TVs, and the first computers. I should add that vacuum tubes weren't perfect. Sometimes they'd get way too hot, and also, they were large. So eventually they got replaced by smaller and more efficient transistors. 20. Pneumatic tubes. This next invention sounds like a crazy idea. And you know what? It was. I'm talking about the pneumatic tube system, where your handwritten messages were placed inside cylinders before being shot through a network of tubes to the intended person. The system worked by using a compressed air pump, and it was invented by coal and steam expert William Murdoch, with additional work completed by George Medhurst and Josiah Latimer. You may have seen the tubes in old comedy movies, and they were also featured in the classic scene at the Burns power plant in The Simpsons. This communication method was perfect for sending messages around company buildings, and can be viewed as a 19th century prototype for email. There were no inboxes or pings here, just a whole lot of sucking and blowing. 19. Telex machine. Before instant messaging, we had old school technology like fax machines. But this next fact goes back even further. The telex machine was invented in 1926 by German doctor Erich Budelmann, who built on the pre-existing idea of teleprinting. Telex was a typing device that could send messages to other telexes as electrical signals along telephone lines. The message was typed at one end and zapped across, where it was retyped at the other. Each machine had its own address code, which was kind of like a historical version of an IP address. You don't see them around anymore, however, they were still in use in the 1990s, so they had a good run. 18. Mechanical TV. We're used to watching electronic TVs now, but did you know there was an earlier mechanical version? This invention had a spinning disc inside called a Nipkow disc, named after German engineer Paul Nipkow, one of the people behind the development of TV. The disc, which spun at a rate of around 12.5 revolutions per second, featured holes in a spiral shape. By shining light onto a person or object and putting the disc between the bulb and the subject, you wound up with lines, which were then put on a screen. Where did the lines come from? Well, they were made by the holes, or to be more precise, the disc scanned the images line by line. This groundbreaking process was first demonstrated in the mid-1920s by John Logie Baird, a hugely important figure in the invention of television. 17. Rotary phone. Phones of the distant past used to be more like clockwork devices than button-operated ones. Viewers of a certain age will remember rotary telephones, where you put your fingers in numbered grooves on a dial. You need to rotate the dial with your finger till it's stopped before letting it roll back into position and dialing the next number. Each rotation sent a signal, or pulse, to your local telephone exchange until you'd finished dialing and the call was connected. Incredibly, the first automatic telephone exchange was developed by an undertaker. Almon Brown Strowger from Missouri came up with the idea in 1891 after having too many of his calls messed up by the operator. I miss mine. I'll admit, I miss it a little. I had the Mickey rotary where he's holding the phone. There were the button ones. I had the Mickey rotary phone. Loved it. Yeah, baby. 16. Carbon paper. Ink is used for writing and printing on paper, but if you get ink all over the paper, it's a mistake, right? Wrong. There is a special kind of paper, pre-soaked in carbon ink with wax, called carbon paper. Go figure. It did what Xerox machines do today. How did it work? You made copies by putting the sheet of carbon paper between two sheets of regular paper. By writing on the top piece, you pressed down on the carbon, which then imprinted the exact copy on the bottom sheet. That's where the old expression carbon copy comes from. It was invented in 1806 by Ralph Wedgwood, who was part of the iconic British pottery dynasty. 15. Ticker tape machine. There's one sound you'd hear all the time down at the old stock market, and that was the sound of ticker tape. A long, narrow strip of paper, or tape, would emerge from the ticker tape machine showing printed data such as stock prices. It provided a minute-by-minute account of what was going on in the 19th and 20th century business, where companies could rise and fall in the same week. Traders would tear off the relevant section of paper while the machine kept printing out information. The machine was invented in 1867 by American Edward A. Callahan and got its name through the constant ticking noise it made. And that's also where ticker tape parades come from. That's what's falling down. Ticker tape. It's fun to say. Give it a shot. Ticker tape. 14. Milk chute. People used to hide their milk in little compartments, which were built into the walls of their homes. While this sounds weird, the milk chute was actually a practical move, enabling your milkman to deliver fresh milk and store it securely. The milkman left the new milk in the chute, while a secure door on the inside opened to the house so it could be collected. Why didn't homeowners keep milk in the refrigerator? Because back then, there weren't many refrigerators. Milk chutes, or milk doors, were a common household feature between the 1920s and 1950s. 13. Zogroscope. They had 3D entertainment in the 18th century. The zogroscope took 2D images and enhanced them, using a convex lens and a mirror to boost the perspective and depth. This visual trickery made people think they were seeing artworks like landscapes and engravings in 3 dimensions. Engravings were already a little 3-dimensional, but the zogroscope took it to the next level. They were invented by an Italian physicist named Giovanni Pellini and were originally called optiques. Fancy. 12. Dictaphone. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone in the 1870s, and he was also partly responsible for another voice-based invention that revolutionized office working. Dictaphones, which were developed a few years later by Bell's Volta Laboratory, meant bosses everywhere could record their communications and instructions. These were listened to by their secretaries who would type them up. You no longer need to be sitting with your employee while they transcribed your words. You could leave them a voice note anytime. Beginning with old-fashioned wax cylinders, the invention later became linked with cassette tape and mini-cassettes in the 1970s. Voice recording and transcription became even less of a hassle once online voice notes and transcription software were established in the workplace, replacing the dictaphones of old. Isn't that what BioShock used? Were those considered dictaphones? No. Shoot. No. I don't think so. 11. Punch card machine. Incredible though it may seem, there was a time when little cards played a big part in how we accessed data, and even how we voted. These cards were punched with holes, which were then fed into card readers. What were the cards reading? Well, the holes represented information, and what's more, they needed a machine to punch them. Hermann Hollerith, a German-American statistician, invented the punch card machine for this purpose, making a fundamental step forward in the field of data tabulation, arranging data into tables. Faster info led to faster development in areas such as computing. Punch card machines were originally designed for use in the census of 1890. This invention blazed a trail right up until the 80s, so it spent almost a whole century in the spotlight. Think the Flintstones when he punches in. Old time punch cards. 10. Comptometer. This next invention looks like a crazy typewriter, but it's actually a calculator. Before they became smaller and could fit in the palm of your hand, we had this old type of calculator called a comptometer. You saw it in offices and other locations where business took place. For the first time, people could simply hammer out calculations instead of constantly pulling a crank handle like you had to do with previous devices. American industrialist Dorr Eugene Felt invented the comptometer in 1887. Speaking of calculations, the machine made him extremely wealthy. 9. Perforated music rolls. Pianos that played themselves were called pianolas, or player pianos. But where did the music in these instruments come from? The answer is perforated music rolls. They may sound like something you'd order in a restaurant. However, the reality is they rotated in the pianola, using a musical code to tell the piano what to play. What was this code? The perforations let air in, which then pushed on the keys. Music rolls were punctured either by automation or by human hand. Player pianos were a great night out for 19th century music lovers, though they were later replaced with more convenient options. Just ragtime, baby. It's immediately the first song I think of when I see the player piano. 8. TV antenna rotator. Here's a question that'll show how old you are. Do you remember having to climb a ladder so you could adjust the TV antenna on the roof of your home? Maybe your parents did it. Either way, it was precarious and a little dangerous, so luckily someone invented a mechanism to take care of that problem. It was called the TV antenna rotator, fittingly enough, and it's credited to various people. From the 50s onward, you could use a dial or switch to control the antenna from the comfort of your TV room. It was a huge deal, because if the antenna pointed in slightly the wrong direction, you weren't watching television that night. Better to twiddle a control box than to keep going up on that ladder. 7. Teasmade. I'm thinking only the British could combine an alarm clock with a tea-making service, which is exactly what they did in 1936 with the classic Teasmade. This mechanical device was a variation on similar inventions made over previous decades, but it was that period when it started capturing people's imaginations. Goblin was a weird brand name, and you'll also find it on vacuum cleaners. Now, these don't sound like the safest of things to use due to the fact that you had water being boiled close to your bed. However, that didn't stop Teasmade from being popular. While they went out of style in the 70s, Teasmade are still being, well, made. 6. Telegraph sounder. Long before people could easily communicate over long distances on the phone, we had Morse code. The code is made up of dots and dashes representing letters and numbers, and the telegraph sounder was an invention that helped people transmit the code. Invented in the mid-19th century by American machinist Alfred Vail, it was the perfect way to interpret Morse code signals from different locations. The sender would tap their message manually with the telegraph key, which was sent across the wire network as electrical signals. Once it reached the other side, the sounder automatically bashed out the code. It moved with a magnet and is seen as a forerunner of things like the telephone. 5. Stereopticon. The Stereopticon is best described as a super magic lantern. Like the magic lantern, it's a projector. However, it was a lot more powerful and created a 3D style illusion that had audiences in the 1860s totally captivated. The key to the Stereopticon's success was it had 2 lenses and 2 projections, recreating the way we see with our left and right eyes. This resulted in a fuller and deeper visual image. Scenes of nature, history, and other subjects were seen like never before with a stereoscopic effect, hence the name Stereopticon. The name is credited to businessman and chemist John Fallon, though others developed the projector before he gave it a title. 4. Dynamotor. The early 20th century saw a transformation in the way electricity was used to power equipment. A dynamotor combined 2 important things needed for controlling electrical current: a motor and a generator. Motors turn energy from electrical to mechanical, and a generator goes the other way. Put the 2 together, and you have a motor generator, which was an alternative name for the dynamotor. For equipment that needed high voltage, this was a relatively safe and stable power source, which converted direct current into alternating current without causing costly damages, or worse, a threat to life. 3. Telautograph. In 1888, a machine called a telautograph transmitted handwritten messages. How does that work? Well, you wrote with a stylus that was connected to another stylus in another location. Your writing motions were converted into electrical signals, meaning your message was being duplicated for the receiver at the other end. It was used for various purposes. For example, the telautograph was a great way of signing a document without being there. The invention was like an ancestor to fax machines, which themselves were launched in the 60s. Machines such as the telautograph laid the groundwork so that faxes could be a thing. The inventor was Elisha Gray, an electrical engineer who worked with phones and also helped found the famous Western Electric Company. 2. Coin changer belt. People working in public transport today have it easy compared to previous eras. To collect a payment, all they need to do is offer a card reader, so passengers can just swipe their card or use an app. It wasn't that way 100 years or so ago, let me tell you. The previous century saw bus conductors wearing a belt known as a coin changer. This portable invention was loaded with coins, which were released using a spring mechanism via a lever. Invented by an individual named Jacques L. Galef, the coin changer belt saved conductors from rummaging in their pockets for loose change. Other sectors also used them, and they were seen as efficient. However, the thought of coins popping out of a spring-loaded tube at speed in a moving vehicle doesn't really strike me as the best solution to a problem. 1. Geiger counter. This invention isn't forgotten, but we see less of them today. I'm talking about the Geiger counter, which is used to pick up traces of radiation. German physicist Hans Geiger came up with the device, which focuses on ionized radiation. What's that exactly? The difference between radiation and ionized radiation is the danger factor. Ionization is bad news for any form of life at an atomic level. Ionized radiation, such as the particles from alpha, beta, and gamma, take electrons from atoms, which can cause us serious harm if we're not careful. Geiger's invention uses a tube full of gas that basically makes a clicking noise when disturbed by ionized energy. You can read the radiation levels from the meter on the front and work out whether you should stick around or get the heck out of there. With nuclear threats rising during the Cold War, it was vitally important for people to have access to Geiger counters. All those classic inventions certainly put the modern world into perspective, huh? History is more than a game. Or is it? And I have a question on that theme. According to legend, the game of Monopoly was invented by Charles Darrow in 1934. However, it turns out Monopoly was based on a game invented years earlier by Lizzie Magie. What was the name of her forgotten version of Monopoly? Was it A, the landlord's game, B, race across the city, C, buy and sell, or D, go time? Let me know your answers in the comments. Now, I'm not advising you do anything illegal, but you might want to check out our video about illegal devices you have to own. How can you own them if they're illegal? Well, you'll have to watch and find out. Now don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you soon for another inventive list. Also, let me know if you still own any of these. Some of them are old. Be pretty sweet. You own a Geiger counter? I don't know.